Hey, Damon Tay here with PT Biz, and I have some interesting pricing specifics to share with you based on a test that we did in different demographics as far as average income is concerned, and the price points that were tested. Probably going to surprise you a little bit. So price point is one of the things that when we look at the biggest businesses that we work with versus the smallest businesses we work with, there's definitely a separation there. We recently did a internal assessment of a number of different factors of businesses. There was an industry report that we put together. And one of the things we found, which is pretty common sense, I think, as far as correlation is concerned, is the more you charge, the more likely it is that you have a bigger business, right? So it's the amount you charge times the volume you have essentially equals your gross revenue in a simple fashion, assuming that's the front end offer. Well, as we looked at that, we started to look at a couple other factors. And this was also the demographic area that you were in. So I was able to kind of pull out a few different examples of a pricing test that we did recently with a handful of clinics. And I was able to compare their pricing, so how high their pricing was in comparison to their median household income. And I found something that was pretty interesting and something that really should help you better understand how you should be pricing yourself, and probably the fact that you're probably undercharging. Now, before I get into that, I want to share my experience with this because I know changing your price points can be very scary. I've now done this in basically every single business we've ever been a part of. And every time that you change your pricing, you increase your pricing, you think to yourself, everybody's going to leave. No one's going to work with me. You know, like I'm not going to have any more new patients. All the old patients are going to be mad. The reality is very rarely do you actually, see any sort of negative impact to your business. And if anything, what happens is you have people that are kind of pain in the ass patients or clients that they get upset and they don't come back. But they're also probably the people you don't want to work with anyway. If they get that upset over a $10 to $20 change in what you're charging for a visit, like these are just challenging people to deal with. Probably best for you to not have a long-term relationship with them anyway. So I've never really seen it aside from the one-off, example here and there of a patient that maybe just gets upset, as long as you manage it the right way and you handle the price raise correctly. But when the first price raise we ever did, so when I started Athletes Potential, we were charging $175 per visit. Now, granted, I wanted to charge $125, but the group I was working for at the time was called Mobility Y. This is Kelly Starrett's company, which is now known as the Ready State. That's their current company name. And I remember I had a conversation with him, and he was like, "Dude, if you charge anything under $200, like you're doing the wrong thing." But I couldn't do that. I just, at the time, I was like, "There's no chance, man. Like no one's going to pay that." And so I settled in at $175. Was kind of sort of met him in the middle, sort of, right? So I started at $175. And as we brought on our first admin, I wanted to be able to pay for her salary without necessarily decreasing our profit. So I went from $175 to $190. And at the time, I was only doing visit to visit. There's no packages. There was no plans of care, nothing. So it was just $175 to $190. And I was so nervous about raising my rates, like so nervous that I delayed actually doing it for weeks until finally I decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. The next person that I talk to on the phone, that's like a discovery call, I'm going to just tell them it's $190 a session versus $175. And you know what happened? Nothing changed. It was exactly the same because it's such a minute jump. In our mind, it was huge, but to the consumer, they didn't even know what the price was actually. They just wanted to know what it cost. And it wouldn't really matter to them if it was $175 or $190. They didn't really care. And for a lot of us, where we're pricing ourselves, there's a sweet spot, okay? And it changes based on your location, which I'm going to get into in a second. But if your cost of living is higher, your rent is higher, gas is more, food is more, insurance is more, just the cost of living is higher in your area. You're going to have to pay more to run your business and you have to pay more for your staff to be able to have the same quality of life in that city. So you would think that higher cost of living areas would be associated with higher price points in these cash-based clinics. But that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, that's not really what we see. Generally, it trends to that direction. You charge more if you live in New York City than if you live in Memphis, Tennessee or something, right? But not always. And I think there's a mismatch there. There's a disconnect between what people should be charging based on their area, based on their demographics, and based on their cost of living that is really, it hinders businesses in higher cost of living areas that don't actually match that up with where their pricing should be. And a lot of it is because of fear. Frankly, it's fear of mispricing themselves and not getting the business that they would have got if they were at a lower price point. Now, there's another variable there, which is what you charge is one thing, but your volume is the other. So there is a sweet spot in regards to what you charge and the volume you can expect to see. So maybe if you charge $400 a visit, you will see a drop in your volume, but does that change in what you're charging make a meaningful difference overall in total revenue and total ability to be able to pay your staff what they're worth and get really high quality people? I don't know. It's very dependent based on the scenario, the case, the niche, the area, the brand strength, a number of factors. But I can tell you this much, if you undercharge in a high cost of living area, it's very much going to affect your ability to get great staff, to pay them well enough to live in that area. And in higher cost of living areas, you usually actually have an easier time hiring people because it's more of a place that people want to live usually. So that's why it costs more. And so you have the easier pipeline of hiring, but you can't hire people because you don't make enough revenue per provider to actually be able to pay them. So this is where I see providers or clinic owners really shoot themselves in the foot. And when we looked at this test of this pricing test that we did with a handful of clinics, there were 4 clinics that I looked at. And this was really interesting because I looked at their price point, their average price point, and I looked at their median income. So this was the median income for these 4 locations. So location number 1 was $84,000 median income, household income annually in this location. Location number 2 was $111,000 annually median household income. Number 3 was $118,000, and number 4 was $129,000. So you would think clinic 1, which is $84,000, which is 50% less than the 4th one, which was $129,000, would charge less than the clinic in a higher cost of living area. Well, when we look at their average visit rate or their plan of care, it wasn't correlated to their location at all. In fact, clinic number 1, which was $84,000 in household family income, median household income, had the highest price point by a good chunk compared to the rest of these clinics. Number 2, the second lowest was $111,000. They had the second highest price point. So the second lowest median income, the second highest price point. Clinic number 4, which was $129,000, they had the third highest price point. And clinic number 4, which was $118,000, they had the fourth highest income, or fourth lowest price point, I should say. So like they were the lowest out of all of them. So the lowest average income had the highest price point. The second lowest average income had the second highest price point. The highest income had the third highest price point, and the third highest income had the fourth highest one. So it didn't correlate whatsoever. But here's what happens. If you're clinic number 4, where you're seeing $118,000 in average income in your area, and you're charging less than everybody else on this in this test, who 2 of the 3 are significantly lower than you in average income, here's what's happening. You're undercharging, you're unable to pay your staff what they are worth, and you're going to have a harder time retaining staff as well as scaling your business, because at the end of the day, your net profitability is not lining up with your demographic area. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at your price points and ask yourself, honestly, if you're charging what you should be for your area. The areas that I see this absolutely become a bigger problem than anywhere else are the high cost of living areas. If you live in the Bay Area, if you live in New York City, if you live in Chicago, if you live in Boston, if you live in LA, San Diego, some of these cities are starting to become more expensive. Even Atlanta is starting to become far more expensive. Charleston is becoming far more expensive. These are definitely areas that are starting to become more and more expensive. And if you are not keeping pace with the change in cost of living in your area and you're undercharging, you're putting yourself in a really bad spot. Because here's an example. Let's say this clinic that was, in an area that has an average income of $84,000 on a household annual income, and they're charging 50% more than a clinic where it's 50% more expensive for people to live there. They're going to eat your lunch as far as net profit is concerned. They're going to be able to pay their people so much more money. They're going to be able to pay their people and have far better benefits for them. They're going to just have a better culture overall because they can reinvest in their people in such a significant way. So what you charge isn't just about how much money you make. It's about how much you can reinvest in your staff, in your space, in your culture, and in investing in the business in a way that allows it to really grow and mature and become stabilized. It allows you to hire leaders internally in your company so you don't have to do everything forever. That is what's happening there. So the fear that you have about what you're charging, you got to get over that shit because it's going to hold you back in your business. And I can tell you this much, across the board, I don't care what city you're in, you're going to need to be between $190 and $200 per visit per hour average based on what we're going to have to be able to pay staff. And it's continuing to, obviously change and cost of living goes up basically every single year. It's in some percentage. So that's not going to change. If you're in a higher cost of living area, you need to be closer to $250 plus. If you're in the Bay Area and you're not at $250 plus, you're going to have a really hard time paying your rent. You're going to have a really hard time paying your staff. And that's just the way it is. Like, you're in an area that costs more money. You have to be able to charge more in order to even have a viable business there. Like, that's just the way it is. I do see this though. There are sweet spot areas. These are sort of mid-sized cities where the cost of living is still relatively low, but you can charge between, what a smaller market and a large market would be able to accept. So you actually have a really interesting position to be in. You can be in a sort of a higher price point per session. Cost of living is lower, your rent is lower, your overhead for your company is lower. And this is actually where I see the most profitable companies that we have a chance to work with. So this is where we see some of these clinics that are running 40+% net profit margins. And at the end of the day, it's not about what you make, it's about what you keep. So take a close look at what you're charging. Look at your average, demographic area, what the income level looks like in your area. Compare that to some other ones. And this is actually the power of people in our mastermind group. We just got together with a couple hundred clinicians in Dallas for our mastermind event in person, for our PT Biz Live event. And it's really interesting to sit in on conversations, to sit at breakfast with people where they're talking about what they're charging and their price points and things like that, and to hear two people. Like, I sat there with a group of people on a round table, and I overheard two people having a conversation. One was in a smaller market and one was in a big market, and they were charging the same. They had the same price point and they had the same size businesses basically, except one was more profitable than the other because they didn't have as much overhead. And it was interesting to see that clinician in the bigger market have a light bulb moment that they needed to charge more money. And they were undercharging because they randomly sat down next to somebody that had a similar size business to them, same basically set up, performance-based, cash-based clinic, and to hear that they were charging what they were charging in a smaller market. That is where the light bulb goes off. That is where the courage gets developed for you to then say, I got to go raise my prices. I got to reestablish a better price point. Why? Because you got to be able to provide the net profitability to the business, the profit that's there to then reinvest in your staff, in your space, in their benefits, to create jobs that are fantastic, to create jobs that are on par with what they can get in corporate-owned clinics and hospital clinics and home health without having to see 20 plus people a day, without burning them out, with allowing them to work with fantastic people in a niche that's interesting to them, to let them be world-class at what they do and do that for an extended period of time and not just leave the profession after a couple of years, which is what we see over and over and over and over again. And my hope is that these clinics really, they save people from leaving the profession, great providers from leaving the profession. We need fantastic providers in our profession. People need our help. And it's up to us as business owners to create an environment that is ideal for them to be able to live the life that they want, have the impact that they want, be able to make the money that they want, be able to be a part of a fantastic culture and feel like they are a part of a big mission of helping people live these high performance, pain-free lives that we help so many people actually live. So take a look at your business, see what you're charging. And if it's not, on par with where you need to be, if you're not in a bigger market, if you're in an expensive area and you're not charging, $250 a visit, you're not averaging up towards that, you need to really look at why. Because as you see your rent going up, you see your insurance going up, you see your staff asking for pay raises and they want you to pay for healthcare, how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it if you don't have the money to be able to do it? When my wife worked in the nonprofit world, which she did for years, they used to say, no money, no mission. And guess what? It's the same thing for us. These are mission-driven businesses. They're not nonprofits, but man, we help a lot of people. And it's a really, really special thing to be able to do that. Remember, no money, no mission. It's up to you to charge for your worth.